Well, hey gang, welcome to video 5 of the Pro Tools Bootcamp series. If you have made it this far, then you are pretty awesome and you sat through a lot of important stuff and you're learning. You're getting it all in your head and you're on your way to having a very in-depth and functional knowledge of Pro Tools, and that's what you need to be a power user, to be using Pro Tools as a tool for your music and not something you get lost in and that takes away from the creative process. Pro Tools is there for you, and I'm proud of you for going through this, and I'm excited to take a look at the mixing video, video 5. We are going to look at how you mix in Pro Tools, what tools are available to you, and some tips and tricks on how to get the most out of your system while you're mixing. So let's pick up where we left off. Here we are in my song. We're building it along. We've recorded MIDI and audio, and we've edited and cleaned up and done some comping, and we're starting to really pull things together here. But the mixing stage is exactly what it sounds like. It is taking those tracks like they were ingredients and mixing them into something that works as a whole, the whole song. Doesn't matter how cool your drum loop is or how cool your lead guitar part is, do they all fit together? And Pro Tools gives you plenty of control over your mix. So let's start by looking at the mix window. When we get there from hitting Command or Control equals, flips you right over to the one of the other two main windows in Pro Tools. And of course, if you've been messing around with Pro Tools for even a hot second, you can gather that these tracks going left to right are the same as my tracks here going top to bottom. Okay, so it looks just like a mixing console. This is familiar to most of us coming from a live setting and from an analog recording setting. So you've got your tracks vertically. If you understand one track, you understand them all. Got it? So let's take a look at a basic track. Right here on the left, a main guitar track. All you've got are the inserts, the first 5 inserts here. And right below that, you've got the sends. We'll look at these specifically in a minute. Your I/O setting, which should be already have been set when you were recording. Your automation setting, we'll look at that a little bit later. And if it's a part of a group, you'll see your groups here. You got a pan knob here. You can go up and down. You've got your record enable, your solo, your mute buttons. These are all the same. And then you've got your mixing fader. And this is important because this fader actually controls the volume of that track in the session going to your mix bus relative to the other tracks. Okay, so you could have recorded a nice hot signal, but you could bring it down here. Or if it was too quiet, you could bring it up here. So that is your main track. And the only difference is if you find maybe a stereo track, you have 2 meters here, 2 pan knobs, but everything else operates pretty much the same. So what I want to show you is how I would approach mixing and how you get some plugins into your setup and how you route audio and how you start getting a mix to come together. The most basic thing you do with mixing in Pro Tools is obviously get some relative volume levels. And you, instead of keeping everything at 0, what I like to do typically is have everything pulled down to around -10 and start from there. But just start messing with the volumes. Take a listen to your mix and see where you are, Let's take a listen. So you can just start playing along, grabbing your faders, listening through your song, obviously, and getting a relative mix to start with. You want to start messing with pan. Panning is obviously placing your audio track within the stereo spectrum, left or right, middle, wherever you like. It's a pretty basic mixing technique here. But when you're ready to start maybe getting some, let's say, compression on the vocal, because the vocal is kind of hard to hear, I've got it cranked, and sometimes I'm singing a little bit lower. You want to start using plugins, and let's start there, and we'll figure it out. So you come up here, choose an insert, just like we did with an instrument track, and you can see your plugins by default are categorized. All your EQ plugins, your compression type dynamic plugins, if you have any pitch shifting plugins will be there, your reverbs, your delays. You get the picture. They're all categorized, okay? And this is how you choose what you want. So if I wanted to start with a compressor, let's say on the vocal, let's choose the compressor limiter that comes with Pro Tools. Well, then what you want to do is bring it up. There you can see it. And then we want to flip over to the edit window and find a place where this track, you can see the plugin indicated there on the edit window. It's the same thing. I want to find a place where I can take a listen to the plugin.
I'm on an island, my shores are closed in, and now I'm sinking, yeah. I need a way out of for answers, revealed in your word, like I've always heard. But I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know anymore.
So you can see the audio coming in here on the input. You can see me adjusting the threshold, the gain, and you can see the overall output change.
I'm on an island.
Input's a little quieter, output's a little louder. You can see the gain reduction. And that's all I'm doing is just selecting some audio, putting an insert, a plugin on that track, and playing with it. Of course, you could always come up to the presets, choose one of the many presets. These are great starting points in Pro Tools with the plugins. Hit it, and then start adjusting the threshold and gain to exactly what your track needs. So that's basically bringing in a plugin. And the cool thing is, say I like the way that compression is working on that track. Well, I sang the chorus on a separate track because of some overlap. So might as well just option drag a copy of that compressor to this other track, so you're good to go.
I don't know anymore. I'm finding it hard to believe. I need to see you.
And again, if we just Command or Control click it, we can bypass.
Finding it hard to believe.
Now we'll engage it.
I need to see you. So show me your hands and your feet.
So it's as simple as inserting a plugin, Option or Alt, clicking and dragging if you want an exact copy. Of course, we could then open up this version and tweak it a little bit if we needed to. But that'll save you some time. So as you're using these plugins, you could do this with your EQs, your compression, anything you want. And a little tip here, the order that you place plugins makes a difference as well. So at this point, if I like the compression, let's say, and I'm on verse 2, I may want to EQ a bit, so I may drag that compressor down. It's not going to affect it, but that allows me, if I like the sound of EQ before the compressor, I can do that here. Let's say, open up EQ4 band. Let's take a look.
Thought I saw clearly how things were meant to be, yeah. Must have been dreaming. I need to hear you, take time to know you, try and obey you, yeah. Then I turn and listen to the stupid voice in my head.
So you can adjust the EQ, but then again, if you like the sound maybe better of the compressor before the EQ, you can take a listen.
Thought I saw clearly.
You can play all day long with the order of things. You can drag, drop, and in Pro Tools 7 and 8, at this point, you can mess with that while playing in real time. You don't have to stop the track to add a plugin or rearrange a plugin, okay? It's completely up to you. A little tip here while you're mixing, again, if you want to bypass, we looked at, Command or Control clicking so you can hear the track without that effect. But if you're really trying to bypass something and you're not sure if you want to even use it at all, you might as well make the plugin inactive, which not only bypasses the sound of the plugin, but it disables the plugin entirely, therefore freeing up some of your computer's power. And to do that, you simply hold Control or Command and click on a Mac, or Windows Control click on a PC. And that will ghost it out, and therefore it's not only muted, but it's not even taking up power, and you can just repeat that to bring it back. Or you can right mouse click and choose Make Inactive. It does the exact same thing. All right, so that'll save you some power while you're mixing. One thing I want to show you is sends and buses. This is very, very important in mixing in any program, and especially in Pro Tools. Now, when you're back over in the mix window, let's say I've got my drum track here, and I want to fatten it up. And now I could compress the drum track itself. It's a drum loop, so I could just put a compressor right on the track. But what if I want to make a copy of the drum track and do a kind of some parallel compression? Well, here's one thing you can do. Open up a new track. We'll choose stereo aux input. Now, aux inputs we used earlier for our click track, as you can see here. But they are very helpful in mixing for group tracks or parallel compression or EQ tracks or routing to other effects. One example here is some parallel compression. I can double click, call this, let's say, Drum Slammer. And what I can do is, let's see, I'm going to create an input for this track on a bus. And I'm going to choose bus 3 and 4, let's say, okay? And I'm going to then take the drums and send a copy of the drums to bus 3 and 4. A send is basically you've got audio coming through the track, through your plugin, all the way down. It hits any sends you have and sends a copy of it. But there's still that same track coming through, so you'll still hear the same drums. Again, this is just a digital instant copy. And you can choose, a little fader comes up, you can choose how much you want to send. I want to send it, I'll just solo these two. I want to send it to this Slammer track. So you can sort of see it coming in here. So now I'm hearing it on this track and a copy on this track. Now, why is that important? Well, that allows me to put effects on this aux input that will only affect this one copy of the drum. So for instance, let's put a, let's see, 1176 plugin that comes with Pro Tools. I'm going to then basically press play. So here's the original. So you can basically hear me slamming that track down on this aux input, but it's not affecting the dynamics of the original loop, and that's one way to do it. If I want to put effects only on a copy of it, you can do that through an aux input. Another way to use an aux input is for global effects such as delay or reverb. So let's delete this track. You can right click on any track, choose delete, and you're golden. Let's say I want to, the same thing here, I want to have no send. Gonna create a new aux input. We'll do stereo. I'm gonna call it reverb. And then I'm gonna insert a reverb on it. I'm going to choose this input here. We'll do, 3 and 4 since that's available. And what I'll do is while I've got this here is I'm going to right click on that bus 3 and 4 and rename it to something that's easier to remember, reverb. And that renames the entire bus. So if I want my vocal to go through that, let's say, I'm on verse 1. Then I want a send on bus to that stereo reverb bus. There it is. And I make sure my reverb is, let's say, a large room. What you can do is test it out here. Just solo the track and the reverb track.
I'm on an island, my shores are closed in, and now I'm sinking, yeah.
So I have the dry vocal track here, but I'm using a send to take a little bit of a copy, not all the way to full volume, to send it to this reverb. Now that's important because instead of putting the reverb right on the track, I've used an aux input so that I can send this other vocal to the track. I can option click, and they have the exact same send. So in the chorus, I can also have. What about the harmonies? I can do the same thing here. Option alt drag a copy. Now all 4 of those tracks will be going to the same reverb, and I'm only still using 1 copy of this reverb plugin instead of having 4, which would take up 4 times as much computer power. So you can see the benefit of routing things through buses and sends to aux inputs to share an effect, let's say. So you could have a couple of these. You could have a reverb or two, you could have delays, however you like to use them. Another fantastic way to use sends and aux inputs is for group tracks. So let's say I've got two rhythm guitars here. I have a wah guitar and another lead guitar, and they're all playing this one chorus here at the end. You can sort of see all four playing. If I want to put a global effect on those guitars in general, like I like to use a high pass filter on guitars to get rid of a lot of the low end that I don't need. Well, instead of putting a high pass filter on every single one of these, let's make them a group track. Let's come up here, let's create a new aux input. Again, we'll call it guitars. And then what I'm going to do here is come back here in the mix window. So there's my guitar track that I just created. It's got no audio on it. I'm going to make its input bus 5 and 6. I'll right click it, rename it, call it guitars. And then I'm going to click, hold the shift button, and click the last one to select all four of these guys. And while holding shift and then option or alt, I'm going to select the output of just one of the tracks. Instead of going to your main speakers, route it to that bus, guitar. Because while I was holding shift and option, it did that for all four. You see what I'm saying? So now these things will not go to your speakers. They will go here first. But then this track, of course, goes to your main outputs 1 and 2. So let's take a listen to these. But if I unsolo this aux track, you're not going to hear them because they're routed through here. It allows me to control the volume of all the guitars at once. And you can see how that could be helpful in mixing, especially in automation, which we'll look at in a minute. Now, of course, I can go ahead and put a high-pass filter on this one track, and it will remove all the low end out of all the tracks. Beautiful. And at that point, I've made one plugin, one change, and I know it's affecting all of them. And this is really helpful too if now I want to route all the guitars to the reverb. I could do that from this send. You see what I'm saying? These sort of, in essence, these aux tracks, if you route the outputs of, a series of tracks to them, can act like a group fader on a traditional console. So I could have a fader for all my guitars, all my drums, if you have multi-track drums, which is very helpful, all your vocals, and then all your other instruments, let's say, and then that just gives you 4 faders. If you have the overall balance working amongst, let's say, all the vocals and amongst all the guitars relative to themselves, then if you route them appropriately and you have 4 or 5 of these group faders, then you could just mix those 4 or 5 faders whenever you need the overall vocals to come up or the overall drums to drop down at this one point. You see what I'm saying? It will make mixing simpler for you and give you some more control. And you can make as many of these as you want. You can rearrange them so they're easier for you to find. I try to put them right after the tracks I'm mixing. And so that kind of gives you some control there using aux inputs. Now, the beauty of Pro Tools and mixing really lies in its automation. So let's take a look at that right now, because this is where your mixes are going to come alive. Let's unsolo all these so everything is available. And what I want to do is I want to show you 2 ways to automate. First is manually, where you write automation. So I like to do that from the edit window. And what you'll do is, let's say, I got a good example here. This wah guitar, I have it really loud during the verse, and it's really kind of quiet at the end of the song. But I want it all in one track, so I don't want to take up too many tracks, because that's just kind of how I am. So let's get the volume right here, and then I'll automate it at the end of the song.
I'm on an island, my shores are closed in, and now I'm sinking, yeah. I need a way out of here. Looking for answers, revealed in your word, like I've always heard.
So if you got the volume kind of where you want it here, but then if I come here to the end of the song,
You're real, I'm finding it hard to believe.
this needs to be a little louder at this end of the song. So the simple way to do this, guys, is select the area that you want to adjust the volume, because if I just bring up the volume here while I'm mixing, and I will forget that will affect obviously the volume at the beginning of the song. Come over here to the waveform button, and again, these are the track views. We talked about these earlier, and you have one called volume. And what you're going to see is a horizontal line that represents your volume. The higher the line, the louder it is. Now again, if you remember from our last video, if you have the Smart tool enabled, this will then allow you to adjust this easily. You move the mouse up and it turns into sort of a trimmer tool that's turned on its side. And that allows you to click and drag up, and you can see the volume going up. And you can even see the line jump up there and jump back down. That is your volume. So let's take a listen.
I know you're real. I'm finding it hard to believe. I wanna see you. Please show me your eyes.
And it's that simple. The volume here is at minus 6.3 dB, but then here at the end it's minus 2.1, and you've just written some automation. Now that's what I'll do in sections. I'll just select and drag up or down. You could even drag that part down if you wanted. You know, it could be completely automated.
I'm finding it hard to believe.
Of course, you can undo, or you can select and click backspace, and it'll delete the lines you drew. Now, this is where the pencil tool comes in handy also. You can click and freehand or line or whatever you want, drag automation. So maybe I want it to be a little louder here, and then back down, and then louder, and then down, and down. There you go. Take a listen.
I know you're real. I'm finding it hard to believe. I wanna see you. Please show me your hands and your feet.
It's going up and down, up and down. It just wrote a lot of little points of automation data. So again, I'll just select all that and delete, and we're still back at that minus 6.3. Now, if I adjust this down to 7.8, it moved the whole line down to 7.8. So this is your global volume. But a word of warning, once you start messing and writing automation, you can't adjust the volume here. So if I turn this up here, and I'm loving it's lower and it's louder here, I think it's perfect. But then later, I'm mixing, I say, you know what, this needs to be a little louder overall. I click and drag it up to minus 4.2. You're like, great. But then you press play. It dropped back down to minus 6.2 because it's saying, no, now you have automation written. It's going to be 6.2 and then plus 1.3 here. So you need to get rid of your automation if you want to do one global change, okay? Because the answer there would simply be to just automate that a little louder. It's no problem. So you can write volume automation there. You can also write pan automation. So if I want this part to be panned left, I'll drag it up so you can see the little arrow to the left by 51, and this is panned down. Pan to the right. So you can see, you just telling it where to pan. You can even click and have the pan change midstream. Right here in the middle of the riff. So that's how you write pan data. You just draw these lines, and again, you can use the pencil tool for lines or triangles. You can just drag those as you see fit. It'll make crazy panning. So if you ever wondered how they get that sort of back and forth tremolo effect, you just write it with the triangle tool. You use the square tool. You can use the pencil tool to your advantage, of course. But then at the end of the day, just select and delete it all if you don't like that. You can do the same thing with the mute data. So if you really want to mute one section, you can select and everything is not muted globally, or now that one section is muted. So you hear nothing, even though it's playing. And then it's unmuted right where you want it. And you can click in the middle and adjust this line. Just drag that line back to fine tune where you want it muted. You can write that data all day long. These again on the different views: volume, mute, pan. Now let me show you how to write plugin automation, okay? Let's go and delete that. Let's say you've got a plugin like this high pass filter that you want to automate. For instance, maybe in the chorus here, you like how it's nice and full. But let's say you want the second half of this to have this cool high pass filter effect. What you can do is, if you want it to sound normal here, but then here you want it to sound really affected, let's just take a listen to just the guitar so it's easy to tell. You can automate that as simply as drawing some data. And what you're going to do is choose the plugin that you want to automate, come up here where it says auto, and click this button right below it. And it brings in this plugin automation box. And it says, okay, of the different things you can adjust in this specific plugin, okay, this is a simple plugin. So these are the only things you can adjust, whether it's on or off, the gain, the frequency, etc. You can add that as something to automate. For instance, you can do master bypass. So I want that to be able to be automated, and then I want the frequency to be able to be automated. So I'm adding those as things that I want to be able to automate. So follow me here. You click OK, and what it's going to do is open up more lines of automation. For example, I come down here, I choose, again, this is where the plugin was. I choose the track view of that, and you've got volume and mute and pan, but now you have effects. You have effects automation for that EQ3 one band that we're talking about, and there they are, master, bypass, or frequency. I created new lanes of automation. So let's choose master bypass, and let's bypass it so the plugin is always bypassed. But then the second half, I want it to be on here. So it's off for 2 bars, it'll kick in real subtly here, but then at this point I want the effect to really, the frequency to change. So I would come down here to frequency, and again there's a line here that says it's at 200 hertz basically. So here I want it to go up really high. Let's take a listen. No effect, then it kicks in subtly. Now the frequency is going to change. See what I'm saying? I automated for it to kick in right here, and then that's the bypass, and then I automated the frequency to change here. Now, of course, you could then draw that line to slowly change. Nice and simple. You see what we're doing here? We're telling the plugin under the auto button, I want to be able to adjust these parameters of the ones available. And then it allows you to see it as a line to adjust here. That is writing automation in the edit window. Now, it may be more suitable for you to do this in real time on the actual plugin or track. And let me show you how you would do that. So let's go ahead and delete this. And once we've got those things automatable, the bypass and the frequency, you can do the same thing in either window on the actual plugin itself. And what you'll notice is the word bypass is highlighted green, and there's a green button engaged under the frequency. But there's no green button engaged anywhere else because those are the 2 parameters that I've chosen to automate. Again, if I take these 2 and remove them, and click OK, this is not green, and this is not green. That means nothing is set for automation. But if we take the frequency and add that for automation, that tells Pro Tools when I press play and start doodling with this knob, it is going to record what I'm doodling with. And what you're going to do then is take this track and put it in touch automation mode. Right now it's in read mode, but if you want to write live automation, you want to put it in touch. This turns into auto touch. You see it's red. this little green light, which was green saying this is automatable, is now engaged. It's saying, okay, you're ready to write some automation. Now, at this point, when I press play, whatever I click and adjust that's automatable is going to be recorded. So this knob in particular. So let's start, and I'll show you what I mean. And I don't know if you noticed, but when I was clicking the mouse, this engaged even darker red, and when I let go, it comes back to this white with red. But what it did is just record it, so I can press play, and you can watch the knob move and it affect the sound. It's just remembering what I clicked and dragged just a second ago. So you can do a motion once and it's saved forever. So you can move on to something else and you can slowly start automating more and more things as they build up. Now remember, I just made sure that the thing I wanted to affect is available for automation, added it, clicked OK. And then I came down here, took it off of read mode, put it in touch mode. And that allows me to write automation only when I'm touching a knob. So if I press play, it won't change any automation unless I click on the mouse somewhere. Then the moment I click, it's going to start writing that automation data. So it's great if I wanted to just tweak that or redo it myself. You can do it right from there. And you can see, if we come back here to the frequency, you can see what I just did. Dragging the frequency up and then dragging it back. It wrote my automation here that I was doing here. You see how those are one and the same? And if you're done with automating a certain track, then go ahead and put it back in read mode and it'll still read that automation. Very, very helpful. Now this is the same type of technique that you can use for automating volume levels and send levels. For instance, instead of automating that volume of that lead guitar track here at the end, remember we get back here to the volume and it's still too quiet. Instead of clicking and dragging this up ourselves, we can just automate with its own fader. So we can do that either from the mix window by choosing wah guitar, putting it in touch mode, and pressing play, and then adjusting this. And when I let go, the mouse goes back down, and you can see it just wrote that volume automation right there, which is really cool. If I undo it, you can also do it from the edit window right to the right of the output. There's a mini looking fader, don't know if you noticed. That just brings up the exact same fader that's in the mix window, so I can be looking at it here, which is great. Press play. And you can write automation all day long while watching it write the line, while being in the edit window, whatever you want to do. Okay, and when you're done, you can go back to read mode, and that way it won't write any automation you don't want it to write, but it will follow what you wrote. Make sense? That is the power of automating in Pro Tools. You can automate plugins, everything in a plugin, whether a plugin is bypassed, whether a track is muted, whether the volume adjusts, whether how much you send it to a reverb. You can have the vocal have more reverb in the chorus versus the verse just by automating the actual send fader. You can automate pan. You could just click and drag while you're in touch mode. You can start to see how this is never ending. You can automate anything you can think of in Pro Tools. And that is what I think allows Pro Tools to shine, is you can have these great tracks that you recorded easily, you have great virtual instruments, and they're edited nice and tightly. But automating your mix is going to allow your mix to come to life. You can automate a whole instrumental section to sort of have a swell, a volume fade up in a way right before a chorus to get some energy, like add a crescendo that maybe wasn't there when you recorded it. This is the power of automation, and it's used a lot more than you can even imagine in popular recording today to get levels perfectly. Because back in the old days, you'd have to have a bunch of hands on the console, multiple people knowing when to move the fader while you're recording it down to tape. But now you can do things one at a time, get it right, adjust it as you need to, and then your mix will come together at the end. So, guys, that should give you a lot to stew on in mixing. I hope that was helpful to you. Again, remember the mix window is your friend. It's a great way to see all your tracks at once and see your volume meters flying up and down. And keep in mind this too, guys. We looked at groups in the editing window. Edit groups. This is going to be very helpful with mixing groups as well. Don't be afraid to use those, whether you're grouping all your vocals together, selecting these four, let's say, while holding Shift, Command G. Again, just make a vocal group and make sure it's edit and mix. Click OK, and there it is. Now you can click and drag all the vocals together and their volume will stay relative to each other. Or you can mute them all, solo them all. Groups are your friend both in editing and in mixing, okay? And whenever you don't want to use that group, remember you can just uncheck it. So don't be afraid to use groups, and don't be afraid to just experiment. Use what Pro Tools has to offer and just go crazy with it, all right? Hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Stick around. We're going to look at using effects on the master fader and bouncing your track down for the web and for putting it on a Redbook CD. Take care.